Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. So today, I want to do something a little different. Instead of just going through the contract and explaining things to you and giving you information, I wanted to see what you're retaining from the classes that I give you and you guys have been attending. So we're going to have a little quiz. We're going to do a little trivia, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some questions, not give the answers. And what I would like is for those of you that want to answer or know the answer is to raise your hand, not unmute and blurt things out, but just raise your hand. And then I'll try to determine who was the first one to raise their hand, and that person is going to get a shot to answer the question. So raise your hand if you want to answer the question, okay? And then you can unmute when I call your name so you can answer the question, okay? So everybody's clear on the rules. I'm going to ask the question. You're going to raise your hand. In the list of participants, you're going to raise your hand. Not on the video because I can't see all of the videos. You're going to raise your hand, and when I call your name, you're going to unmute and answer the question. Seem fair? At least that way we'll all learn something. Maybe we'll have a little fun, a little competition. I think it'll be an interesting change to how we've been doing contract class. So let me first start by sharing my screen here. Let me get this open. And we're going to share that desktop. So right now you should be looking at a blank desktop for the moment. But what I am going to do is, boom, there we go. So you guys should be seeing let's see. You guys should be seeing contract trivia. If you're seeing anything else, please let me know. Okay. So here we go, right? Contract trivia. Everybody ready? Remember, for those of you that are jumping on right now, you're going to see the question. If you know the answer, raise your hand, right? Use the raise hand on your Zoom panel there. Raise your hand. When I call your name, you can answer the question, okay? So let's hope that there is somebody in this group of 25 of us that knows the answers. All right, so here we go, guys. First question. The first question is, what is the first form a buyer or seller should sign? All right, I see Gilbert has his hand up. Go ahead, Gilbert. You have to unmute yourself, Gilbert. Gilbert's hand was up first.
All right, that's the agency agreement form.
Ooh, I'm sorry, but technicality, you're out. Sorry. Shh, quiet down. Maricela, you are next. What's the answer? Go ahead and unmute.
The agency disclosure.
Ah, man. I don't know. That's you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. It's not 100% correct, but I am going to give it to you just for the rest of you guys. The form is the disclosure regarding agency relationships, or the form number is AD. So I know that we refer to it as agency disclosure, so I'm going to let that one pass this time, but know that the true name of the form is the disclosure regarding agency relationships, the form AD. Now, the disclosure regarding agency relationships is just that. It's a disclosure letting the client, the buyer or seller, know the ways that they could be represented by an agent, right? They can be a buyer's agent, a seller's agent, or an agent representing both, which is a dual agency. And in that capacity, I have to have the permission of both buyer and seller to act as a dual agent. All right, so good work on question number one. See, not too difficult. All right, so I'm going to lower everybody's hands here that was participating. All right, so let's go on to question number two. Question number two. How many pages is the RPA? Hey, don't unmute. Raise your hand. Okay. Who's unmuted there? Sylvia, I'm gonna mute you. All right, so Lily was first. So go ahead, Lily, unmute yourself and answer the question.
30?
Ooh, sorry, that is incorrect. So I think Maricela was next, but I missed who the next one is. So I'm going to go to Melissa because Maricela already answered one correctly. So Melissa, go ahead and unmute yourself and answer the question.
17 pages.
I'm sorry, that's incorrect also. Okay, Maricela, it's you.
14 pages.
Man, and we strike out. That's it. 3 strikes and you're out. Anybody else out there have an idea how many pages it is? Anybody? Wow. All right.
26?
Oscar. No, Oscar raises. Come on, guys. Remember, raise your hand. Don't blur it out. Oscar, go ahead.
13.
No, I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to have to call it because it sounds like we're going to just be naming numbers for the next 25 minutes. The answer is 16. And it's even right at the very top of the purchase agreement. It tells your client, buyer, you must initial 16 pages. Okay, so 16 pages. The original one was 10. Now it is, before the changes, now it is up to 16. I thought for sure that was going to be one of the easiest ones we had. All right, so let me lower everybody's hands again. And let's move on to the next question. Here we go. To change terms of an already accepted offer, what form should you use? All right, Joey, hands up right away. Go ahead, Joey, answer the question.
An amendment.
Sorry, Joey. There's more to that, so I can't give you the thumbs up on that one.
It's rigged.
All right, Lily, go ahead.
The change of terms addendum?
Sorry, that's incorrect also. Alfredo, you're next.
Never mind.
All right, Gilbert, come on.
That's a amendment of existing terms. Agreement.
There we go. There we go. There we go. All right. Gilbert, thank you for saving me. Amendment of existing agreement terms. The form number is AEA. The amendment of existing agreement terms, the reason we should be using this form when we're changing terms to an already agreed upon contract, right? We're already in transaction, we're negotiating and changing terms. The reason we use it is because, number one, it has an expiration date, right? It's good for 3 days by default, 3 days after it's issued. It has a place to acknowledge a rejections, right? So if the buyer is asking the seller for some change in the contract, it has the ability for the seller to reject it or to sign and accept it. We have been in the past using addendums where addendums don't have an expiration date and they don't have a place for us to reject. So it kind of causes way more paperwork than is necessary. So any changes where we're negotiating the terms of the agreement that was already agreed upon, it is the amendment of existing agreement terms. Good work, Gilbert. Thank you. I'm glad you had the right answer. All right, here we go. Moving on. This is question 3 now, right? What form must be included in offers with FHA or VA financing? Jennifer, hand up right away. Go for it.
It's the mandatory clause, FHA, VA clause.
I will give that one to you. Yes, the correct answer is the FHA VA amendatory clause, or the form initials are the FVAC. The FHA VA amendatory clause is included with any FHA and VA financing, and what it says is if the property doesn't appraise for the amount that is written in that form, then the buyer cannot lose their deposit. Okay, so keep that in mind. It has to be included. So even if you don't include it with your offer, which you should be including it with your offer, somehow it will be included. And usually what happens is escrow adds that in there because of the FHA or VA financing. And remember, this FHA VA amendatory clause, it continues to protect the buyer even if the buyer has removed their appraisal contingency. So even if a buyer's removed their appraisal contingency, if they have an FHA offer and the FHA VA mandatory clause has an amount written into it and it doesn't appraise for that amount, the buyer cannot lose their deposit even if they don't have an appraisal contingency. All right, so good job, Jennifer. Here we go. What's next? What are the default number of days the seller has to provide disclosures to the buyer? Well, Lily's already got her hand up. If nobody else, let's see. Jennifer, I want to see if anybody who hasn't answered a question already has. Okay, well, you know what, Lily, hold on. Yeah, Lily, go ahead. You were first and you didn't get yours right, so go ahead.
7.
Very good. 7 is correct. That was probably the easiest question on here. Now remember, for the seller, for the seller, that wasn't a knock on you. I'm just saying it was the easiest one. Remember, for the seller, those 7 days are not just disclosures. Okay, they are reports. They're information. Like so, right? City of Compton, City of Southgate, Maywood, Huntington Park, all of the cities that require pre-sale inspection reports. Those pre-sale inspection reports are supposed to be delivered to the buyer within 7 days of acceptance. Not only is that delivery within 7 days of acceptance, the delivery of forms and disclosures, but also the seller has to do the installation of the smoke detectors, the carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heater strapping by default in the purchase agreement in those 7 days. So as a listing agent, right, keep in mind that when I'm discussing these things with my seller, that one of them I have to remind them of is not only do I have to prepare them to do the disclosures in a timely manner, not only do I have to prepare them to order pre-sale inspection reports and get those reports delivered in a timely manner, but I also have to make sure that they do the water heater strapping, the smoke detector installation, and the carbon monoxide detector installation in that first 7 days by default. If they can't, or don't want to, or we're negotiating something different, then I have to address that in a counteroffer. So keep in mind, like, we just can't ignore those days. If we're not going to be able to perform in that time period, we have to address it in a counteroffer so that the buyer is already aware of that delay from those 7 days. Okay, so just to recap before we move on to the next question, does anybody have any questions about the stuff that we've already talked about? Any of the questions that we've asked, the stuff we covered, does anybody have a question or doesn't understand or is unclear of some of the stuff we talked about before I move into the next set of questions? No? You guys are good, huh? All right. Well, let's move on. And I appreciate everybody's doing a really good job of just raising your hand and not blurting out answers, so I appreciate that. So congrats to everybody. All right, so here we go. Next question. What 3 transaction types do not require a TDS? Getting a little harder. All right, Maricela, you got your hand up. Go for it.
Trust, probate, and REO sale.
That is correct. That is correct. Probates, REOs, and trust sales with the successor trustee do not require the TDS. Now, if the successor trustee is living in the property as their residence, then they do require a TDS. So there is a little bit of a caveat to that they're not just blanketly, they don't have to do the TDS. So if you have a successor trustee, right, the original trustees have passed away or are incapacitated in some way, the successor trustee is now in charge of that trust, but they live in the property, they are still required to do a transfer disclosure statement, even though it is a successor trustee sale, okay? And if it's the original trustees, right, the people that set up the trust originally when they purchased the home, they are required to do a TDS. So it's only that successor trustee who is not living in the property that makes it so they're not responsible to provide a TDS. So good job, Maricela. And I bet Sylvia knew the answer too. All right. Let's move on. Keeping with the TDS, when a TDS and SPQ are not required in a transaction, which form replaces them? Silence. Wish I had the Jeopardy music or something, right? Hey, Lulu's jumping in. Lulu's got her hand raised. Go ahead, Lulu. What's your answer?
The Avid?
Nope, sorry. That's always required. TDS or not. Anybody else? I want to remind you guys that all of these questions are things that we have discussed in contract class. I promise. I'm not springing any surprises on you. All right, back to Maricela. Go for it, Maricela.
The SPQ.
Nope, sorry. In the question, it says when an SPQ is not required.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody else? Come on. Just throw out. Okay, Sylvia, go for it. You have to unmute, Sylvia.
The statement of information?
Nope, sorry. Those are always required also, too, and regardless of the TDS SPQ. That's not a disclosure of the statement of information. That is something that title requires, right, to make sure that they can provide clear title. So, nope, sorry.
I don't think you taught us this one, Kyle.
I promise you I have, Gilbert. Come on, anybody else? Give it a shot. Anybody? Come on. All right, I guess I will reveal the answer then. The answer to this question is the exempt seller disclosure, the ESD, and we have talked about it. So, look, there are mandated disclosures that a seller has to provide to a buyer, right? We know that, and those are the TDS, the SPQ, the lead-based paint, the NHD report, the Megan's Law disclosure, right? There's a list of them, and they're in paragraph 12 of the RPA now. The exempt seller disclosure, though, because an REO, right, like we just talked about before, an REO, a probate, and a trust sale with a successor trustee aren't required to provide a TDS and an SPQ. They're not. They still have to provide an NHD report, and they're still required to disclose what they know about the property. And in order to do that, they have to answer those questions somewhere. So what they've provided for them is what's called an exempt seller's disclosure. So it's a little bit less. It's fewer questions, obviously, than an SPQ, right? The SPQ is like 4 pages. The ESD is 1 page long. It asks questions like, did someone die on the property, which with a probate and a trust sale could probably more than likely be yes, right? So it gives the seller an ability to answer some questions. And just like every other disclosure for a seller, it says, are you the seller aware? So as an exempt seller, right, a TDS, an REO, or as a trust, an REO or a probate, there's fewer things that I am going to be aware of with that property. So it doesn't go into as much detail. But again, it does ask, are you the seller aware? So it gives that seller an opportunity to at least make some disclosures that they may be aware of. So keep in mind, just like in the last question, if it doesn't require TDS, it doesn't require an SPQ, and you would substitute those two things for the exempt seller disclosure. All right. All right. So far, questions. Any questions so far before we move on?
Hey, Kyle, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You said only the trust, the one that fills out if you lived in the property, it's a trust. If it's a probate, what if the person benefiting from the probate sale lived in the property?
No,
do they have to fill it out?
No, the probate doesn't require it. Only the trust sale does.
Just a trust sale. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just one. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome. All right, guys. Any other questions before we go on to the next question? It sounded weird, right? All right. Before I ask you a question, do you guys have a question for me? That's better, right? Okay. Let's move on. What form do you incorporate in the transaction if the seller will remain in possession for 45 days? And obviously that's after the close of escrow. So if the seller's going to remain in possession after close of escrow for 45 days, what form do you include? Okay, Lily, your hand was up first. Go for it.
The rent back there?
The rent back thing, no, that's not an actual form, but I appreciate the try. So, Arnold, go ahead. You were next.
It's the SPQ, the seller possession in possession.
No, sorry, that's not correct. The SPQ is the seller property questionnaire, and the seller,
I'm sorry, not that.
and the seller in possession is
That's
not the
IP,
correct. Yeah, that is not the correct form. So sorry, Arnold. Jennifer, I see your hand up. Go for it.
It's not the SIP?
It is not the SIP.
Huh. Okay.
It is not the
Pay
SIP.
attention more often, no?
Yeah, I will say this is fun to ask these questions. It is making me a little sad about what I teach you. That's all I have to say. Okay, so Alfredo, you were next. What's up? What's your answer?
Residential lease after sale.
Thank you for rescuing my ego, Alfredo. That is the correct answer. It is the residential lease after sale. And the reason that is the correct answer is because the seller license to remain in possession, or the SIP, which I figured was going to be the most common answer, is only for 29 days maximum. So once I get past that 29 days, when I get to 30 and plus, I have to use the residential lease after sale. Okay? So keep that in mind. Residential lease after sale. Now, it is a full-on lease agreement. It is a full-on lease agreement. So it's 3 or 4 pages long. It's going to take some filling out. It's not just like the SIP where it's one page. And I know people like to use SIP because it is a lot easier to fill out. But the problem is the SIP does not handle terms correctly, and we need to make sure we're using the residential lease after sale. And I know for sure this is something we've talked about in the past. Again, this is just to help us retain this information, because I don't want ever to see you guys get into a position where we've used the wrong form and we're not protected and our client isn't protected. So keep in mind, 29 days max on the SIP. Anything more than 29 days, we have to use the residential lease after sale. And the other thing we have to be careful of, too, is how long we're allowing that seller to remain in possession, because for most financing deals, 60 days is the max amount of time that financing will allow that seller to remain in possession, where it doesn't affect your buyer's financing from a owner-occupied loan to now an investment loan because they have a tenant. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, guys, this is good. I like it. We get to discuss stuff. You guys, I get to see what you know. Next question. Staying with the COP. Did I put this in the wrong? Put this in the wrong order. Sorry. Staying with the COP. That means you guys know there's a COP question coming. Let's just look at it this way. With the COP, by default, right, we're using a COP. You guys all hopefully know what a COP is. By default, how many days must the seller wait before they can ask the buyer to remove this contingency? The COP is the contingency of sale of buyer's property. So by default, how many days does the seller have before they can ask for the buyer to remove this contingency? Anybody? Nobody? Come on. Throw an answer out there. Go for it, Sylvia. I see your hand up. Go for it.
21?
I'm sorry, what was that?
21?
21. No, I'm sorry. That is incorrect. Maricela, you were next.
7 days.
I'm sorry. That is incorrect. Oscar, you're up.
17.
I'm sorry. That is incorrect. Anybody else? Anybody else want to give it a shot? Ishmael, you're unmuted. Did you want to give it a shot?
14.
I'm sorry, that's incorrect. Anybody else want to give it a shot? Angel, my man Angel, go for it. You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, there it is. I'm gonna say 30.
I like that, and I'm gonna say you're wrong. Okay, so here we go. I knew.
How about as many as I want?
Yes.
Right?
Well, almost. That is almost correct.
Yeah.
So let's go over it. And I knew this was kind of a trick question, and the key to that is by default. So in the COP, right, in the contingent, Alfredo had raised his hand. So you want to give it a shot, Alfredo?
How about 3 days?
No.
No, that's incorrect, but I know where the 3 days is coming from, and we're going to talk about that right now. All right. So, by default, in the COP, right, the form that you send with your offer, that is the contingency of the sale of buyer's property, by default, the seller can give an immediate notification to the buyer to remove that contingency anytime after acceptance by default. So if I am a seller and I've accepted your contingent offer, okay, remember I said by default, I've accepted your contingent offer. If I get another offer that is non-contingent, I can immediately send you a 3-day notice to remove all of the contingencies, show proof of funds to close, and move forward with the escrow. And if you can't, then we cancel. Now, the next section, right, is a checkbox that says I can delay the right of the seller to notify me, and the default there is 17 days if I check the box. And then the third box that I could check says the seller never has the right to notify me to remove that contingency. So the key in this is the default is I could get an immediate notification from the seller that says you've got 3 days to remove all these contingencies and move forward. That's part of the contingent sale. So understanding the COP, I got to make sure I have at least the second box checked that says I'm delaying their right to 17 days. Okay. So Alfredo, you had your hand up. Did you have a question about that?
No.
Oh, okay. It's still from before. All right. Let me lower those. Okay, so keep in mind, guys, when you're writing these contingent offers, because I know that that's what we're doing a lot of because we're selling properties for people to buy properties, is make sure you're filling out that COP correctly to make sure that you're protecting your buyer, right? At least giving them enough time to get through removing contingencies from the buyer and things like that, okay? All right, moving on. Seller can immediately notify. There we did. We gave the answer already. This question is, when a seller is participating in a 1031 tax deferred exchange, what form should be incorporated into the transaction with the buyer? Should be. Come on, guys.
Is it the seller intends to exchange?
Ismael, make sure you're raising your hand first, but go ahead and answer.
Oh, okay, sorry about that.
It's all right.
Would it be the seller intent to exchange?
That's correct. It is the seller's intent to exchange addendum. The form is the SXA. Angel, is that what you were going to answer? You had your hand up. Was that going to be your answer?
Of course. Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, so seller's intent to exchange. And the reason why it's important to include that seller's intent to exchange is because it has some things in there to protect sellers. Like, I know that with 1031 exchanges, and for those of you guys that are not familiar with 1031 exchanges, right? A 1031 exchange, the way it works is I have an investment property that I'm selling, and I'm going to, in order to not pay capital gains tax on that investment property I'm selling, I'm going to exchange into another investment property so I can defer my taxes to another time, right? The taxes I have to pay. Hence the name. But in order to do that, the terms are I have to identify the properties that I want to buy within 45 days of closing. And I have to close on one of those identified properties within 160 days or 180 days of closing escrow on my investment sale. The problem is that especially in this market, could it take longer than 45 days to even identify properties? And then if you don't identify a property in that 45-day window, you could be putting yourself in jeopardy of that your money's going to be stuck with the accommodator for 6 months and that you'll still have to pay taxes. So what the seller's intent to exchange does is it works kind of like seller's purchase of replacement property, that contingency of finding a replacement property. And it lets you work on finding that exchange property while you are still in escrow. So it has some built-in extensions. It has maybe a cancellation even. It has a cancellation section even where I might be able to cancel if I can't find that exchange property. So it's a protection, and it lays out the terms of that of that exchange. Okay. Questions? Yes, Oscar, you put your hand up, so I'm assuming you have a question.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So on this 1031 tax exchange, if they have their own personal home and they have a investment property that they want to do a 1031 tax exchange, but the property that they want to purchase on the exchange, they actually want to move into it.
No.
They can't do that?
No, an exchange like that is solely for another investment property. What they say in the 1031 exchange is it's like for like, right? That's what the IRS code says, like for like. So it just can't be their principal residence, right? So let's say, for example, I'm selling 4 units and I want to exchange out of those 4 units. I could technically go buy a vacant lot, right? Because obviously I'm not going to live in it. So even though it doesn't generate income, it is still not my principal residence, and they look at it as a like-for-like property. So it just has to meet some other criteria, like the amount of money invested in it and how I'm encumbered and things like that. But no, it cannot be their principal residence. They cannot exchange into it.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next question. When removing a buyer from a transaction, what is the correct form to use? There we go. Anybody? Nobody knows? Come on, guys. Let's try. Just throw it out there. We're all going to learn from this anyway. When removing a buyer from a transaction, what is the correct form to use? Okay, Sylvia, you got your hand up. Go for it.
Wait, hold on. I was going to say that. I went blank. Never mind. Is the amendment to the existing terms?
No. Look, here's the thing, and I will say this. I mean, technically, I mean, you could probably use that if you wanted to write the verbiage properly, right? You wanted to write everything out, but this is the correct form, right? Like, we always want to look for there's a form specific to that task. That should always be what we use first, okay? Because I could do on an amendment of existing agreement terms or on an addendum, technically, I can write out any terms I want. I could change any part of the contract. But when a document already exists that handles that specific task, that is always the correct form to use. So maybe that helps out a little bit. Anybody have an idea? Okay, so Salvador didn't raise his hand, but he did in the chat type the correct answer. Salvador, I don't know why he can't raise his hand or unmute. Maybe he's driving. I don't know. But the correct answer is the assignment of agreement addendum. So I will give him credit for that, Salvador. I saw you type that in the chat box. Assignment of agreement addendum, or the form number AOAA. Now, the assignment of agreement addendum does exactly what it sounds like. I'm assigning the agreement, okay? So that form can do a couple things. I can do a total assignment, right? And a total assignment could be referenced as 2 things. A total assignment is I am assigning the entire sale from myself as buyer to a whole new buyer. I'm off, and a new buyer is now the buyer. Or, for example, say Gilbert and I are buying a property together, and Gilbert doesn't want to buy the property anymore. He wants out. That is also a total assignment, because what is happening is Gilbert and myself as the original buyers are now assigning it to me as the sole buyer. So I would become the assignee. And then there's a partial assignment. And the partial assignment is Gilbert and I are buying a property and we want to add Lily as our third partner to purchase the property. We would do a partial assignment, which would be Gilbert and I adding Lily as the third buyer. Okay, that's how you add. We got a question over here from if the seller agrees to add a new buyer of the agreement. Okay, I don't know if I understand the question, but here's what happens. So per the RPA, I have 17 days to make the request for an assignment, right? So whether that's removing somebody, totally assigning it to new buyers, adding a new buyer. I have 17 days by default in the contract to do that. Anytime, now, that just means I have a request to make. The seller is not obligated to accept that request. Okay, so the seller doesn't have to allow me to make that assignment, but I have 17 days to make the request. Once I get past 17 days, I'm not supposed to be making that request any longer. But the seller is not obligated to allow us to make that assignment. Okay, so keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. I hope that answered your question, Salvador. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking, but I was trying to get it from what you typed there in the chat. Any other questions on the assignment? Now, one of the other things in the assignment you have to disclose is, are you getting compensated for making that assignment? Okay, you have to disclose that. So, for example, I bought a property, like it's an investment property, and I thought, hey, this is an investment that I think I want to take on. Then I get into it and I decide, nah, this is not something I want, but I know an investor who does, so I want to assign it to that investor. And that investor gives me $5,000 for making that assignment to him, for him to take on that deal. I have to tell the seller that I'm making that $5,000 in order to assign it to the other client. And the reason for that is this: if I've agreed to buy the property for $500,000 and now there's an additional $5,000, why is the seller not entitled to that, right? Why wouldn't it be worth $505,000? So I do have to disclose that I'm making money on that assignment, and that could affect whether or not the seller allows me to make that assignment. So keep that in mind when you are assigning, a transaction to somebody else. Okay. Any other questions about assignments?
Hey, Kyle.
Yes, Omar.
So, hey, question. Say you're making a correction on the name. Do you use an addendum?
No, if you're correcting the name, you would use the amendment of existing agreement terms, always. Guys, addendums, for just so you guys are clear, an addendum should only be used if you're out of space, right? Like if you have to write something that doesn't allow you enough space in the purchase agreement or in the request for repairs or in the counter offers, that's the only time you use addendums. Everything else should be the amendment of existing agreement terms, always.
Question, Kyle.
Yes, sir.
The difference on the existing amendment to existing terms and addendum.
Mm-hmm.
I called car legal hotline the other day, and they told me, hey, you could ask them, hey, can I use which one should I use?
Yeah.
So you could use either one. The only difference is the amendment to existing terms has a time expiration. Is that
yes?
True?
Yes,
okay.
That's correct. Look, you can use either one. What I'm telling you guys is the proper way to do it is to not use addendums for negotiating. And the reason for that is just that. The amendment of existing agreement term has an expiration date. It has an active way for the seller to reject the request. An addendum does not. So just for an example, I could send you a request on addendum number 1. Let's say it's a credit. So on addendum number 1, I ask seller for a $10,000 closing cost credit, and the seller doesn't want to pay it. So the seller ignores the $10,000, right? So the seller says, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to send them an addendum that says I'm willing to only pay $5,000, right? So I send an addendum that says $5,000 credit, right? The seller signs it. Addendum number 2 says seller will credit $5,000 instead of the 10, but it makes no reference to addendum number 1. So then I go to addendum number 3 because I need more than 5 as buyer. So I send addendum number 3 to the seller that says, no, seller will credit $8,000 to the buyer, right? Now remember, no expiration dates, no act of rejection, nothing on an addendum. I get addendum number 4 from the seller that says seller will pay 0 credit to buyer because they're pissed about me asking for more money, right? But if I go all the way back to addendum number 2, which has no expiration date, it just says seller will pay a credit of $5,000 and it's signed by the seller. If I, the buyer, acknowledge that addendum, who's to say it isn't valid? So the amendment of existing agreement terms has a way for us to reject it. It has an expiration date, so those mistakes can't happen. Things don't get screwed up because people forget numbers. So they do addendum 1, and then they do another addendum 1, and they do another addendum 1, and they do addendum 3, and then they do addendum 4, and the numbers are all screwed up, so we don't know how it works, right? So addendums should only be for when I need space. Amendments are for when I'm changing the terms of an agreement that was already agreed to because it is cleaner and it has some protections for us, okay? So that's just how I think it should work. But yes, could you use it? Absolutely, it is valid. It is just not the best way to amend contracts. Okay? All right. Good. I like this. We're learning. We're talking. Let's get on to the next question. Per the residential listing agreement, how many ways can an agent be paid compensation? Joey, go for it.
Oh.
Yeah, Joey got one right. The answer is 4. You sell it. The seller sells to someone on the exception list, right? Where the next section down is if the property expires or cancels, and I give the seller a list of the people who saw the property while I had the listing. If they sell to anybody on that list within the time specified in the contract, I still am due my compensation as the listing agent. If the buyer cancels and the seller gets damages, right, either keeps the deposit or sues and wins damages from the buyer, technically I am due 50% of those damages or my full commission, whichever is less. No, whichever is greater. No, it's less, whichever is less, right? So if they get $50,000 in compensation and my original commission was $15,000, I get $15,000. If not, I get 50% of whatever they get, right? And if the seller makes the property unmarketable, right? The seller won't allow me to show it. They don't keep the utilities on. They don't take care of the property, right? They're not mowing the lawn. They're not keeping up with the maintenance of the house. Those kind of things that make it difficult to sell or won't allow me to show it, that's making the property unmarketable. I could technically go and request my commission from them, okay? So those are the 4 ways. I sell it. They sell to an exception. The buyer cancels and acts in bad faith and the seller retains some damages, or 4, the seller is refusing to do what they're supposed to sell the house, I could then request my commission, okay? Now, I'm not saying that in those last 2 you should, but the contract does allow for it, okay? So you need to know that's there. And generally what I like to do is I want to make sure that the seller's aware that's in the contract, right? Because I would say that 99% of the listing agents out there don't tell their seller that that's in there. They don't tell them the 4 ways that they may have to pay compensation. Everybody just assumes I only pay if you sell it. So my suggestion is when you're doing your listing presentations and you get that listing and they're going to sign, you start going over the listing contract, that you're clear on that paragraph of the listing agreement and let them know that, hey, these are the ways that I could pay. Will I request it? Will you have to pay it? No, maybe not. I don't know. But I need you to know it's there. And guess what? Every other agent that you have a listing appointment with, if you choose to list with them, that paragraph's going to be in the listing agreement that you sign. And those other 10 or other 3 or 4 people that you may interview, they're not going to tell you that compensation language is in the listing presentation or in the listing contract. So keep that in mind when you are going over the listing agreement. Okay, here we go. When writing an offer on a short sale, what form should be included? Oh, do I need to do this again?
Short sale addendum.
My AirPods switched over to my phone. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right. Anybody?
Short sale addendum.
Okay, I'm going to give it to you, Omar. But remember to raise your hand. You weren't here at the beginning, so I'm guessing that's why you're not doing it. But that is correct. It is the short sale addendum, the SSA. So what the short sale addendum does is the short sale addendum lines out how much time you're giving the seller to get the approval from the short sale lender to approve the offer and approve the short sale and move on, right? So by default, it gives them 45 days. Gives them 45 days to get the approval letter from the short sale lender. If at 45 days they haven't gotten it, buyer can send a notice to perform, and the buyer can cancel at that point. The seller can cancel at that point if they haven't gotten it, because that's part of the defaults. It also has some information. There has some language there about when the deposits are going to go in, when the contingency periods start, those kind of things. So, it adjusts for the amount of time that's necessary to work through a short sale. So anytime you're writing an offer on a short sale, you got to include that short sale addendum, because it has some protections for your buyer. And as a listing agent, you want that in there too, because it does have some protections for your seller, right? It limits the amount of time that you have to remain in escrow if you're having a hard time negotiating that short sale with the short sale lender. All right. All right. And this is our final question, guys. Here it comes. What 3 criteria must exist in order to require the use of the NODPA, the Notice of Default Purchase Agreement? There are 3 things that have to happen in order for this form to be required. Who knows the answers? Come on, guys, give it a shot. Nobody wants to try? All right, Oscar, go for it. I like that you're brave enough to raise your hand. Go for it.
So the 3 required criteria is they have to be behind on their payments or in foreclosure.
All right, go ahead. Move on.
And that's it. I don't know.
That's all right. That was a valiant effort.
Okay.
I'll give you credit for trying. Come on, somebody else, give it a shot. We did just cover the Notice of Default Purchase Agreement not too long. I think it was like a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. So we did go through all of this stuff because we covered directly the Notice of Default Purchase Agreement. Come on, somebody else, give it a shot. Nobody wants to try? Just try, I promise. It's not going to kill you. Wow. You cowards. Come on. Just somebody, just give it a shot. Throw out an answer. Oh, okay, let's see. Right, let's see what our general manager has for us. Go ahead and unmute yourself and answer the question.
Okay, so let's see. The 3 criteria must exist in order to require the use of Notice of Default. Okay, that the seller's living there, number 1. Mm-hmm. That it's not an investor, and that the buyer's not going to live in there. Right? Not live in. Did I miss it?
You missed
Laura,
it.
Laura, help me out.
You missed it. You missed it. You got one of.
On.
I'll just say you got one of them wrong.
Okay, so the seller has to live in it. Number 1.
Yes.
That an investor has to use this form.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm. And the buyer must also be buying it to live in, or is that the same one?
No, it's the same thing. You just said the same thing twice.
Okay. All right.
That's it. That's all the tries you get. I don't want anybody else to know that you don't know the answer to this.
And there's been a notice of default on the property.
Hold on. Unmute yourself and do it again. Okay, start over.
Okay, so number 1, that there's a notice of default on the property.
Okay.
The seller's living in it. And the buyer must live in it.
No, what are you doing?
Okay. Wow. Okay, notice of default. The seller must live there. And the investor can't buy it.
No, that's the wrong answer. Good Lord. Stop. I'm embarrassed. Anybody else want to give it a shot? All right, fine. I'll let everybody off the way. There's still a hand up. Who's got their hand? Okay, Oscar, you want to try again?
So the last one that Richard said, would it be no arm's length?
No, sorry.
Okay.
I appreciate the attempt, but no, that is not the correct answer. All right, I'm going to let everybody off the hook because this is becoming excruciating and, like I said, a little damaging to my ego that you guys haven't remembered the stuff I've taught you. So here's the answer. Property has a notice of default recorded. The seller is in possession of the property. They're living there. And an investor is purchasing the property. Okay? So the problem that Richard, my dad, was having was he kept saying an investor is not purchasing the property. He said that over and over again.
Investor can. I said an investor can't purchase the property.
I'm pretty sure it sounded like can't, but...
Well, I meant that. You know what I mean. Okay.
Yeah.
Never
Okay.
mind. Never
Thanks.
mind.
All right. So, property is a notice of default, and it has been recorded. It's not just that they're behind in their payments, right, Oscar? Because you said they're behind. So, the notice of default has been recorded. Okay? So, they're in the notice of default. The seller lives there. And then an investor comes along and says, I want to purchase the property. If that's the case, if those three things exist in that notice of default purchase, then you have to use the notice of default purchase agreement. If the seller doesn't live there and an investor wants to purchase it, it's a regular purchase agreement. If a buyer is buying the property and the seller lives there and it's a notice of default, but the buyer that's purchasing it wants to make that their principal residence, regular purchase agreement. So the NODPA is only required if all three of those things exist. Anything other than that, you don't need it. And the reason I wanted to really push that home is because I've gotten in this last 2 weeks, I've gotten 2 calls from agents that outside agents are making them use the notice of default purchase agreement when it isn't required. And I get it. When you're a buyer's agent, sometimes you have no leverage. But I want you guys to be really educated on how these things work, because I don't want you guys to be that listing agent that's requiring a form that isn't required. Okay? So there you go. Those are the 3 things. So there it is. We made it. We did it. We got through all of the 15 questions that I had for you guys. It was painless. Maybe we learned a little something. We had a little competition. I really appreciate you guys that you tried. I do. I appreciate that you guys were answering the questions and raising your hand and giving it a shot. And I think this was a fun way to go through some stuff in the contract. And maybe we'll start doing this, once a quarter or something, just to have something different when it comes to contract class, so it's not so serious. Any questions before I let you guys go? Any questions? No? All right. Well, I appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope, this is going to be something that's going to help you learn and retain. So I appreciate you guys being here. So go out there and be safe and productive. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.